Hi, everybody. Welcome. We'll give folks a second to get in here, but I want to get started right away. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for our Know Your Rights Under the New Missouri Voting Laws webinar. My name is Dina Vanderzalm. I'm the Community Engagement Director with Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and we're thrilled to be joined tonight. I'll be talking with Boone County Clerk Brianna Lennon. For those who don't know, Brianna has served as the Boone County Clerk since 2018. And prior to becoming a clerk herself, she worked with clerks across the state in her role at the Missouri Secretary of State's office, running the state's elections integrity unit. And so from her background as an elections attorney to now overseeing elections all throughout this pandemic and more, she is quite the expert, and we're thrilled that you could join us tonight, Brianna.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We wanted to get started. If people are on a computer, if you can access the chat, I should say if you have questions that you want us to answer, you can put them in the Q&A feature at any time. But we wanted to start off with a little bit of kind of a Mythbusters section here tonight. So we wanted to know if you can throw in the chat what you've been hearing already about the law. So as a little bit of context, we wanted to do this tonight because House Bill 1878 is now in effect. It was passed by the Missouri legislature earlier this year, but it did not kick in until late August. So the upcoming November election is the first one where we will be subject to these new rules, and we wanted to make sure that folks felt as prepared as possible as you head to the polls this November. So if you have been hearing some things about the law, if you've got some confusion or just things you've been reading about, there's been certainly a lot of news, you can throw that in the chat. While people might be typing away here, I will go ahead and get started with some of the stuff we have heard, because there's been a lot of confusion. I think you would agree, Brianna, that what has changed with like photo ID, where people are not sure what works anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does appear to be one of the questions that's in there. What kind of ID will be acceptable? Is a real ID required? I don't know where this rumor started that it has to be a real ID, but it does not have to be a real ID. You do not need to have that little star on your license. It does need to be issued by the state of Missouri or the federal government. So a passport, a Missouri driver's license, a Missouri non-driver's license, or a military ID, those are all valid forms. It doesn't have to be real ID, and the address does not need to match what your voter registration has on it. So if you were living in Callaway County and you moved to Howard County, if you're registered to vote in Howard County, they're not going to care that it has a Callaway County address on your photo ID. It's going to matter what your voter registration has on it. So it is not an exact match, and it is not real ID. And there's been a lot of questions too about the expiration date. So does it work if it's still expired? This is a odd little twist to it, is that if it expired after the last general election, so for this election, it'll be anything that expired after November 3rd of 2020, it's still going to be okay. So if you had your license and you've been meaning to renew it and it's 6 months out of date, that's okay because it's after the November 3rd, 2020. But if your license is 3 years old, then it is going to be an issue.
Excellent. And I got a note that the chat was acting goofy. I think I fixed it, but if not, feel free to do what Roseanne did there and put your question in the Q&A. So sorry about that, folks. Another thing we have kind of heard about is people being concerned about registering people, that they have previously done a lot of voter registration as individuals, just like helping people out with that process. And they're concerned that that's like now illegal.
Yeah, so this is one of the areas that it really falls into the Secretary of State's office requirements, and it's very much a better safe than sorry type of situation. So the law says that if you're going to register more than 10 people, and it doesn't define what that means. It doesn't define whether it means that you hand out 10 voter registration applications to people. It doesn't matter if you refer 10 people to the online voter registration. It's very vague. And so if you are planning to do any kind of extended outreach or volunteering where you're going to be registering voters or sitting at a table where there's voter registration, there is a form on the Secretary of State's website to sign up as a voter registration solicitor. Fill that out. You can email it to the Secretary of State's office. They will send you an email confirmation that they have received your application to be a registration solicitor, and that is all that you need to do. And then you can do any kind of registration that you want. There's no requirements that you have to do anything other than fill that out. And the other thing to note is that there's also a similar provision about absentee applications. So you cannot solicit absentee applications. And that's another one that's very vague, where it says that, you know, well, what does solicitation mean for an absentee application? What if my friend is just saying out into the world, oh, I wish that I was going to be around on election day. I really want to vote. Can I call them up and say, hey, guess what? You can get an absentee ballot. I like to think of things as statements of fact. And so if you are simply saying absentee voting is available, absentee voting starts on this date, absentee applications are available on the clerk's website. If you need to vote absentee, call the county clerk's office. Those types of things are just statements of fact. They do not have opinion. They don't editorialize. To me, that's safe. I will make the disclaimer that I'm not giving out legal advice about what solicitation means. And it's one of those laws that there's nothing that you're not going to get thrown in jail for. It is not something where you're going to get like hauled off because you did something wrong. But it does, you know, say that you shouldn't be doing that. It is pretty hard to enforce in the same way that it's hard to enforce if somebody comes into my office and lies about being out of town on election day to vote absentee. I can't really find out if they've lied or not. So those two provisions are in there. We do take them seriously, and I encourage everybody to take them seriously and think of them as kind of better safe than sorry.
While not giving legal advice, spoken very much like a lawyer, but I deeply appreciate it. We had another question in the chat that was about the presidential primary is disappearing and what that process looks like.
Yes, so one of the elements of the law is that beginning in 2024, there will be no more presidential primary election. So for quite some time, we've had some version of a presidential preference election. It's been at different times of the year. It used to be in February, then it was in June, and now it's in March. This means with it going away that it will fall to the parties to host caucuses in order to select their presidential preference candidate from Missouri. So there are caucuses that already exist to determine who the delegates are going to be to the different conventions. But now there's also going to be caucuses to determine who gets the votes for those. So that's something that truthfully had been kind of an issue anyway. It wasn't something that was just because the Secretary of State's office brought it up. There were plenty of county clerks and local election authorities that wanted to change it as well because of its proximity to the April election. So just for background, with it being so close to the April election, there were a lot of people that would get confused or would kind of mess up their April ballot because they got it mixed up with their March ballot, and it was just really not a great situation. And so we had asked for some sort of change, and the legislature elected to just get rid of it altogether.
Well, it's going to be interesting, I think.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, you know, it's not, there's another legislative session between now and 2024, so it's entirely possible something else changes, but for now, there is no presidential preference election anymore. Can I just shoot around to some of these in the chat? Do you care?
Yeah, I was going to go we have a couple in the Q&A that I think are kind of clarifying. So I think while they're fresh in our minds, Yvonne asked us if, well, she pointed out that a lot of the military spouses and kids don't have Missouri IDs. They have out-of-state licenses. With their military dependent ID count, it's a federally issued ID.
As long as it is federally issued with a photograph and an expiration date or is non-expiring military ID, then yes, that'll be fine.
And then we have a couple here from Daniel. He wanted to confirm that a photo ID that is expired, it says after November 3rd, 2020.
Absolutely.
Will be accepted. Okay. And then asking about soliciting absentee voting during the no excuse early portion, that is the 2 weeks prior to the election. Is that allowable or impacted by these rules?
So the solicitation for an absentee voting application applies for the entire time period. There's no real limitation on that. The only caveat that's in there is specifically for local election authorities to help ensure that anybody that does need help getting an absentee ballot because they call us, that we can actually assist them. So we are allowed to assist them. What this really came from, based on the conversations that the legislature had when this was moving through the process, this came from the organizations and campaigns that were sending out pre-filled absentee ballot applications. This law was meant to prohibit them from doing that, and it does. There's another section that says that you can't pre-fill an absentee ballot application. So it was meant to make it so that voters couldn't just receive applications unsolicited in the mail, because they would then call our offices, call the Secretary of State, ask why they got it. People would think that we would send them. It was very confusing. So it is now in there, and like I said, soliciting is very hard to define, and so I can tell you what I am going to do personally is stick very much to just statements about the absentee voting process.
I agree with the better safe than sorry. We also just had a comment, and I'm not sure if you can speak to this, but saying that so Linda did fill out the form for the Secretary of State's office, and it's a comment that like the confirmation was almost immediate, that felt almost like an automated process. So we're not sure. She's questioning how much of an application that is. Is there any kind of evaluation or vetting that goes into that?
No, there's no vetting. There's nothing in the law that requires them to look through anything. So as long as you filled it out and submitted it to them, they don't have to look through it. They don't have to confirm anything. They're just going to simply keep it on file, and that's all that's going to happen.
Easy peasy. I wanted to get to one other question, kind of just like a big thought, and then we'll move to a couple of other main points we wanted to hit. But there's been some concern about vote by mail disappearing, or the ways people have always been voting for years. There's just a lot of fear and confusion about what is going to stay and what's going to go.
Yeah, so there is, and it is very confusing, because if you're looking at just the language of the law that passed, there's a whole section called mail-in voting that got removed. And so people have thought, and I can't blame them, that means that mail-in voting's gone. But that's not what it means. That part of the law that got removed was a very odd definition of mail-in voting that existed in 2020, and it had never existed before that, and it was never going to exist after that. So they were just cleaning up some of the language from 2020. Absentee by mail, having to have the reason to do that and applying for it and getting it in the mail and sending it back to our office, nothing has changed with respect to that. In fact, it's actually been expanded some. So up until this point, there were 6 really strict excuses. Now they've added one in for first responders, law enforcement, and healthcare workers. So anybody in those 3 categories can now vote absentee by mail or in person as well. So definitely don't think that anything is going to change, especially if you have a disability or if you are homebound and you have always voted by being on the permanent absentee list. Nothing is going to change for you. It's all the same. And related to that too, the other section that I get a lot of questions about is people get concerned that they can't use the voting equipment anymore, and that we won't be able to use voting equipment because there's a prohibition on voting equipment in the law. But what that is another kind of cleanup type situation where there were pieces of equipment that we used that not only marked a paper ballot, but also counted that ballot when they were doing it. So if anybody remembers going to vote, especially if you were in an area that this was the exclusive way of voting, where you would vote on the touchscreen and then you would see kind of a little receipt piece of paper on the side, scroll up the side, and you'd hear it, kind of run through, and then it would say, oh, you voted, thanks. Those are going to be prohibited, but those were already outdated. Very few counties still use them. I think maybe only one county still uses them anyway. They've been replaced by what are called ballot marking devices, where you still have the touchscreen, but it prints out an actual paper ballot for you to put into the tabulator. So we are 100% a paper ballot based state. The tabulators we use are still okay. The touchscreens that we use are still okay, but people are concerned that we're going to not be able to use our equipment. We can definitely still use our equipment.
I'm very attached to the paper process in the Show Me State.
Yes.
It just feels like proof. Well, so if you keep having questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. I want to move us along to just kind of talk about, we've certainly touched on a lot of them. Are there any other, major things that have changed that people should be aware of?
I think the biggest thing that I try to remind people in terms of expectation setting is that this blue provisional envelope does exist for anybody that does not have a form of ID or a photo form of ID. So there's a lot of attention paid to the fact that we are strict photo ID now. We must have a photo ID, but there is this catch-all. And I know the term provisional ballot makes a lot of people really concerned about their vote counting. These are a different form of provisional ballot than the type that, by all rights is the type of provisional ballot where you're just sure that you're registered, you're sure that you're eligible, and we just kind of hand you a ballot to make you happy. It's not actually going to count. That is not the situation here. If you do not have the correct form of ID, you will be able to vote your full ballot. You will put it in this blue provisional envelope. You'll fill out the information on it. 2 election judges are going to sign off on it. And when it comes back to our office, we're going to compare the signature on that envelope to the signature on your voter registration record. And that sounds scary to people too. But what I want to also tell people is just raw numbers. We've been able to do blue provisional ballots since 2017. It was a part of the original photo ID law that got overturned in 2017, and we've been able to keep it around. So for anybody that doesn't have an ID, they've been able to vote blue provisional. So we've had probably over 100 blue provisional ballots cast in Boone County in the time that I've been in office. We have not rejected a single one for a signature mismatch. In fact, across the state, if there have been any rejections, it's usually due to the voter not filling in the blue envelope all of the way, an election judge messing it up. And so that's on us to train our election judges and make sure that everybody is prepared. And we've built that into our training processes. But ultimately, we're going to make sure that every voter has the opportunity to have their vote counted. So what I don't want to have happen, especially like the previous question where people get concerned they don't have the right ID, or they get concerned that something's going to happen and they're going to be told that they can't vote. I don't want anybody staying home thinking that they don't have the ability to cast a ballot. The blue provisional ballot is the avenue for anybody that has any concern or doubt. They can vote that. It will come back to our office, and as long as they're registered, as long as they're in the right polling location, it's going to count as long as the signatures match.
On that point, just because I know it's been a concern for people before, even with absentee voting, when we talk about filling out the envelopes correctly, what are the things people need to be looking for?
So the blue provisional envelopes have a lot of personal information on them. So you're going to have to know the last 4 of your social security number, just like you do when you register to vote. It's going to be very, very similar to that information. Your name, your address, your date of birth, the last 4 of your social, and you're going to sign it. I know that we in Boone County and every other county that is doing our election judge training right now will have examples of a accurately completed ballot so that they can refer to that. They'll know what's supposed to be included on it. I have not seen ballots come back where people have not been able to fill them out correctly. So just making sure, what I recommend to people is, if you already know in advance that you don't have the right ID, and you know you're not going to be able to get one. So let's say that you have an out-of-state driver's license and you have no intention of getting a Missouri driver's license, which is, you're right, you do you and have whatever driver's licenses you want, and you don't have a passport either. You just simply don't have an ID under the law. Then be prepared to vote a blue provisional ballot. Make sure that you are aware of, you can call your local election authority and ask if there's anything that you should know, if there's something that they're doing to try to expedite the process for you or something like that. Make sure that you're prepared and that you've budgeted enough time, because it does obviously take more time, not just to fill out a ballot, which in Boone County, it's a front and back full ballot. So it's going to take a while anyway. You're going to have to budget the time to fill out the blue provisional envelope portion too.
Yeah. Well, and having other people sign it adds just a little extra time on that too. There was a follow-up question on this, just saying it's the name provisional, which I know you hear this all the time, right? So they will be counted even if the vote is not close enough that it would make a difference. It's not going to be one of those situations where you turn to the provisional ballots,
Yes.
where it make it count.
Yeah, provisional ballots are always adjudicated and always counted. So there's never, and that's the same for absentee too. I know sometimes people think absentees don't count. There is no ballot in the state of Missouri that goes uncounted for any reason. Every ballot that enters a county clerk's office gets counted or adjudicated in some way. It may not be counted, it may get rejected if it doesn't meet the standards that it needs to have, but it always gets looked at and it always gets adjudicated. And the other thing I wanted to say about that's really important for expectation setting is that may mean if there is a close election, and we have, because there's going to be more provisional ballots than we've had in the past, a lot of outstanding blue provisional ballots in a close election, we may not be able to with certainty say who won that race on election night. If it's a really close margin and we've got 200 ballots that we know haven't been counted yet, it's entirely possible that those 200 ballots make the difference. And if that's the case, it's entirely up to every clerk when they want to start processing them. By and large, people do it during the certification period, which can't start until the Friday following the election. So it's not like you'll wake up the next day and there'll be election results. It'll be a week later that we find out what those results are in some cases. So I like to tell people now, because I don't want anybody thinking, oh, there was a huge problem. Oh, I have such a concern about the validity or the legitimacy of this election. This is a consequence of the law, good, bad, or indifferent, and we just need to be prepared for it.
It's going to make the watch parties feel a little different.
Yes.
We did get another question in here that says, what are the implications of the restrictions that are placed on county clerks with respect to soliciting donations to administer elections? That was part of HB 1878.
So there were a number of counties, this came for background, in 2020 there were a number of counties that received nonprofit grant money in order to offset some of the expenses that we had to endure because of COVID-19 and just some chronic underfunding of our elections over time. So as a response to that, a lot of legislators across the country decided to ban nonprofit grant money going into county clerk offices, local election offices, Secretary of State offices, and Missouri is one of them. So there are exemptions in this law for our offices. For example, we were concerned because a lot of us use churches as polling places, private entities as polling locations, and they give us reduced rates on the rental for those locations. Well, that would be considered an in-kind donation. So we didn't want to have to worry about that. So there are exemptions in the case of polling place rentals, food, if we're getting food for our election judges and things like that. So we do have some exemptions that allow us to continue doing things. All things considered, we don't want to use private and nonprofit money to run elections. We want the state to fund them appropriately. We want federal government to fund them appropriately. So it's really not something where we don't have heartburn over the fact that we can't do it, because none of us would want to do it again. It was a very isolated thing that came as a consequence of COVID-19, and now it's over, and we're not that COVID-19 is not over, but now the taking of nonprofit grant money is over, and we will find other ways to deal with it.
Yeah, and I know people have been surprised by that, but like that money was used predominantly for things like buying lots and lots of pins so that they could be, you know, given away and not used twice, and the plastic shields and hand sanitizer and things that weren't necessarily built into budgets ahead of time.
Well, I like to shock people because so we had not single use, but we had pens, they said vote Boone no, that were really reasonable, like under 25 cents, like super cheap pens that were really cute and people loved them, that they could take. $30,000. It cost $30,000 to buy those pens. That was just pens. And people are shocked when I tell them how much it costs. And it's like, that was like the cheapest pen you could ever get. And it still was that much money because of just the scale of the number of them that you need.
Absolutely.
I want to address this thing in the question and answer.
Yes.
It is not that provisional and absentee ballots can't be counted until the Friday after the election. Absentee ballots get counted on election night. They always get counted on election night, because absentee ballots can be checked by bipartisan teams starting the Thursday before the election. There's a whole different process for how we count absentee ballots. That's not affected by this law at all. Everything continues as it was, and so absentee ballots are going to be counted as they were. I was referring to the fact that some people think absentee ballots don't get counted until after the election, and that is not true. Provisional ballots, however, there's really not a legal limitation on when we can start counting provisional ballots, but I believe, and I think many of my colleagues believe, that it would be irresponsible to start counting them on election night, because they deserve our full attention. They deserve to have bipartisan teams adjudicating them, and we cannot accomplish that by starting them on election night. There's too much happening. We're getting too much information back from our polling places. We're tabulating things. It would risk the integrity of our election if we tried to add something else to the election night process. And we can't just the next day start counting more ballots. So what we can do is the documentation. Obviously, with every provisional ballot, since I have to check a signature, we have to pull those signatures off the voter registration file. Every provisional ballot that will come back here will have to have an accompanying piece of documentation from the voter registration record. That's a lot of research time. So we're going to start doing that, but it's going to take a while to do that, depending on how many we have. When we have accumulated all that documentation, it will be about the time that we will start the certification process anyway, which can't legally start until the Friday following the election. So absentee ballots will all be done on election night, just like they always have. But provisional ballots, just like they always have, will be adjudicated during the certification period.
Excellent. Hope that, just double checking. Okay, we got one question here from Butch. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. So I think you have touched on a lot of this, but the expectations, we just wanted to reiterate, because I believe in saying things multiple times if you want people to remember them, of like what to expect when you go to vote, whether that is, I guess absentee will be a little bit different. Either way, it could be a little bit longer time, but when you're showing up to vote on November 8th, what should people be expecting as they're walking in the door?
So people should expect that there will be potentially, and it totally depends on where you live, because if you live in a place where pretty much everybody has a driver's license and there's no other kind of ID that people are going to use, then you may have a very similar experience to what you've had in the past. If we're talking Boone County, Greene County, any place that has a college population, any place that has potentially a retirement population, there's going to be more people in that group of voters that don't have the correct ID. And if they don't have the correct ID, they're going to have to vote a blue provisional ballot, which means it's going to be longer for everybody. For clerks that are doing planning now, I can only speak to Boone County, but for example, what that means for me is the polling places that I know will have a lot of college students at them, we will have basically a bifurcated system where if you walk in and you already know that you do not have the right ID, we'll divert you to another line so that you can have an expedited experience and everybody else in line can have an expedited experience. So you may see some different layouts at your polling location that you might not have seen before. You may have a longer time voting than what you've had before, so take that into account. You may, if you're one of the ones that needs to vote a blue provisional ballot, you'll need to make sure that you know all your personal information. There's plenty of students. I always like going to register college students because they never know their social security number and they have to go off to the side and call their parents and find out what their social security number is. So if you don't know your social security number, you should probably know that before you go in to fill out the blue provisional ballot, because you'll need that too. So the other thing, and this is a very positive thing that kind of flew under the radar of this bill, is that if you have moved and you've moved across counties, in the past, if you lived in Cole County and you moved to Boone County and you did that the week before the election, you were out of luck. You really wouldn't be able to vote in any meaningful way. It was very difficult and confusing because the law was that you had to register to vote by that 4-week deadline. So when we all talk about October 12th being the voter registration deadline, a lot of people didn't realize that meant even if you change counties. So we always had people come in, especially people that had just moved here from a different county, that would say, I've been voting for 20 years. I just happened to move from Fayette to Columbia. Why can I not vote? And we did take care of that in this law. So if you are changing counties, then you will still be able to vote. You can update your address at any time. If you do that on election day, if you're going to update your address on election day and you've moved counties, you're going to have to come to our office to do it. And that's the case everywhere. So if you need to update your address on election day and you have never lived in that county before, go straight to your county clerk's office. But it will, people that have moved will have a much better experience than people that have moved in the past that have unhappily found out that they had no ability to cast a ballot. It's always been a really rough thing when they come in and we have to tell them that.
Yeah, it's a rude surprise. And Boone County has always, I know, had done a really good job with moving within the county, but yes, the county borders have been always a curse there. I do want us, so you mentioned October 12th. I want to make sure we're listing off what are the major dates that people need to keep in mind as we head into November.
So October 12th is the voter registration deadline. That's obviously the really big one to make sure that if you've never been registered to vote, that's the time to do it. Absentee voting, and we haven't gotten into it too much, but absentee voting, if you're going to do it in person and you don't have a reason to do it, starting October 25th, you will be able to absentee vote in your local election authority's office for no reason at all. If it's just convenient for you, if you just happen to be in the area, whatever it is, you'll be able to absentee vote. You will need to bring a form of photo ID. Photo ID doesn't apply to voting absentee by mail, but it does apply to voting in person. So make sure that you do that. But starting October 25th through November 7th, you'll be able to vote, no excuse absentee. If you need to get a mailed absentee ballot, you need to ask for that by October 26th. And those are the 3 big things that are happening in October. And then obviously the election itself is November 8th.
Yes, don't forget that day. So Roseanne has asked us that, she said they just signed up to be poll workers, which wonderful, love it, want to see more of it. She asks, are you in need of more people? Do you have plenty? I don't know of many county clerks who are turning folks away as poll workers.
No, the tricky thing about recruiting poll workers, and every county has a slightly different version of the same issue, is that one of the advantages of our system is that it's bipartisan. We have bipartisan teams working at all of the polling locations, but that means we need to have enough election judges, poll workers from both political parties to make that work, to be able to have enough polling locations that we want. So lots of times we will put out the request in Boone County for poll workers. We always do need poll workers. Sometimes we may not need your particular political party. And that's the case in other counties too. Everybody is always looking for more poll workers. We like to have backups for backups for backups, because you never know what's going to happen on election day where we need to call you in. But there's definitely need to have more poll workers. And in some cases, we may need you to be on an absentee team. We may have enough mailed-in absentees that we need help, processing those. So we might need you to be on the team for that. So there's definitely a need for it. I encourage everybody to sign up and do it, and get kind of a behind-the-scenes look at how our elections are run.
And when you sign up to be a poll worker, can you be sent anywhere within the county? Are you kept within a certain ward? What does that look like as a poll worker?
So I can't speak to exactly how other places do it, because even in some small, like I'm thinking of Scotland County, they have one polling location. So regardless of where you live in Scotland County, if you're a poll worker, you're at that location. We do try to accommodate poll workers' requests. So if they live in Centralia, we will try to keep them in Centralia so they don't have to drive all the way down to Ashland. It's totally up to you, though. We do have people that live in Columbia that like to go work in Ashland or want to go work in Harrisburg. So we can, for the most part, we can accommodate most requests for anybody that wants to work in a particular area. Jamie asked when you should sign up by. For us in Boone County, our training starts next week, and we're going to train all through the month of October. But today is the day that we sent out our letter to the poll workers that have signed up at this point, so that they can sign up for their training. So this is a good time if you are interested or have thought about it before. Now is the time to reach out to your local election authority, get on their training books, and ask them if they are going to be doing training anytime soon.
Wonderful. I do want to circle back up to Butch, his question that was concern about voter intimidation by observers. I'm wondering what y'all do to prepare your people, what people can do if they observe things that they're concerned about while they're voting.
Yeah, and that is definitely something that we have heard about. It has not necessarily been something that Missouri has had to deal with, but obviously a lot of states have had this issue. And so we are not, I don't think in any way we're immune to it. We just haven't had to deal with it yet. So I will say, like in our case, for our poll workers, we're doing a lot with conflict management and making sure that they are equipped with the tools that they need in order to handle anybody that is unhappy at polling locations. We also, going back to 2020 even, we have lots of ongoing relationships with law enforcement, with people at the Secretary of State's office, to make sure that we know who to call if something is happening or if there's anything of concern happening at the polling locations. So we haven't seen anything at this point. I know that some of I think in Western Missouri, some have had some issues with people saying that they're going to come to the polls and they're going to try to be intimidating, but I'm not sure how many have actually come to fruition. So at this point, it's something that we prepare for, just to let our poll workers know, feel free to reach out to us if you do have these concerns, but we haven't seen it happen yet.
I see. Okay, so in the chat here we have, so ballots should be private. Are poll workers trained not to look at a marked ballot unless it is requested? From previous experience.
Yes. So this can be kind of a tricky area, not because we don't tell people to look at ballots and things like that, but we do have to train them in order to be around the tabulators. And if there's an issue with the tabulator, or if a voter asks for assistance with it, we do tell them to make sure that they are not you know, they're not scanning your ballot and looking it over before they put it into the machine. But I do know, I have also heard of an instance of somebody that has called and said that they felt like the poll worker was getting a little too, they were hovering too much over the tabulator. And so we do try to tell them, to let them know that, there's still people in my office, to let them know that they shouldn't be infringing on people's privacy. They're there to assist voters if they need it, but to maintain that privacy.
And if you, I mean, I think, you know, reaching out to your election authority, if you do see things, if you are concerned, if you have questions, that's what y'all are there for. Like, don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. Make sure we keep improving trainings, making things better.
Yes, what I always tell people, if they have an issue at a polling place, one is, if it's an issue that we can solve while you're there, please tell us while you're there. If you think that there was supposed to be something on the ballot that wasn't there, or there's something wrong with your ballot, call us while you're there with your ballot. Don't cast it and go home and sit and think, oh, I don't think that that was on there. I don't know what to do now, because at that point we can't really do anything, but maybe you have a legitimate issue that we could have solved while you were there. And very similarly, if you've got an issue with a poll worker, and we've done this, if a poll worker has been such a issue that, you know, no amount of training is going to help for whatever reason, then we can take care of that problem immediately. Don't wait and let, you know, a bad poll worker infect the rest of the poll. Like, we want to know that kind of stuff too. And I tell that to anybody that's doing like the election protection work too. Feel free to call the election protection hotline. Feel free to let people know that things are happening, but also tell us so that we can act on it and make it a better experience for everybody else. Because if you've had a bad experience, somebody else may have had a bad experience, and we do not want that to happen. We want every experience to be really good when they go to vote.
Well, we appreciate all that you have done for Boone County and for Missouri. You work very hard on making sure folks know how to vote and feel confident in it. I want to thank you again. Thanks everybody for asking your questions, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Brianna. We will circle back with folks. We have recorded this if people would like access to this, and we'll work on getting some information together that has kind of these top line dates and what you want to know and remember. But we appreciate everybody taking this information, making sure you help us spread the word so we can get ahead of the confusion and make sure everybody, your friends, your family, your neighbors, know what they can do come November 8th or before if they're voting absentee. But thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Brianna Lennon, for all of your knowledge and your time tonight.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right. We'll see you later, everybody. Thank you.